Well, hello from Orlando. How's everybody this afternoon? I hope that I'm coming across here. This is a first for me, a FaceTime. I see little symbols popping up, so obviously we're communicating. So that's good to know. That's a sure sign that Facebook is working when the hearts and the likes and so forth start popping up on the screen. Hi, everyone. I'm Dean Butler. I am really pleased to be able to be here with you this afternoon from Orlando to read from Laura Ingalls Wilder's wonderful second book, Farmer Boy. Farmer Boy, as most of you probably know, was published in 1933, 163 years ago this year. Set in Upper New York State during the 1850s, actually late 1850s. I take that back, 1860s, early 1860s. What am I talking about? Anyway, so it's set in the early 1860s. Almanzo is 1 year in the life of Almanzo Wilder. I'm sure most of you here know. I mean, the reason I'm here doing this is because I was privileged to play Almanzo Wilder on the Little House on the Prairie television series. It's one of the great things in my life that I had a chance to be associated with the program, and it has continued to be a part of my life moving forward from that time to now. And so it's pretty amazing to be able to be a part of that. And as a country, as we find ourselves in this particularly challenging time, it's nice to be able to gather together in this way. And what's wonderful is people from every walk of the world are finding ways to communicate with their fellow citizens. And I'm very grateful that Allison Arngren, whose Facebook page this is streaming through, thank you, Allison, had the wonderful idea to do this Facebook Live, the series of Facebook Live readings of the Little House books. Allison has been a tremendous advocate for, I hate using the word tremendous these days. Anyway, Allison has been an amazing advocate for Little House through the years. And so for her to do this just couldn't be more appropriate. Today, chapters 6 and 7 of Farmer Boy. I love this book. Many of you know that I did a documentary about this book called Almanzo Wilder, Life Before Laura, some years ago. So this is really familiar territory for me, and really a wonderful opportunity. So I'm grateful for that. And with that, we should just jump right in. I'm going to try and read slowly and distinctly so you can all follow along. And if I miss a few words here and there, don't be hard on me. So this is chapter 6, Filling the Ice House. The weather was so cold that the snow was like sand underfoot. A little water thrown into the air came down as tiny balls of ice. Even on the south side of the house at noon, the snow did not soften. This was perfect weather for cutting ice, because when the blocks were lifted from the pond, no water would drip. It would instantly freeze. The sun was rising, and all the eastern slopes of the snowdrifts were rosy in its light when Almanzo snuggled under the fur robes between father and Royal in the big bobsled as they set out to the pond on the Trout River. The horses trotted briskly, shaking jingles from their bells. Their breath steamed from their nostrils, and the bobsled's runners squeaked on the hard snow. The cold air crinkled inside Almanzo's tinkling nose. I said it. I said Almanzo. It's Almanzo. I know that. The cold air crinkled inside Almanzo's tingling nose, but every minute the sun shone more brightly, striking tiny glitters of red and green light from the snow, and all through the woods were the sparkles of sharp white lights in icicles. It was a mile to the pond in the woods, and once Father got out to put their hands over the horses' noses, their breaths had frozen over their nostrils, making it hard for them to breathe. Father's hands melted the frost, and they went on briskly. French Joe and Lazy John were waiting on the pond when the bobsled drove up. They were Frenchmen who lived in little log cabins in the woods. They had no farms. They hunted and trapped and fished. They sang and joked and danced, and they drank red wine instead of cider. When Father needed a hired man, they worked for him, and he paid them with salt pork from the barrels down in the cellar. They stood on the snowy pond in their tall boots and plaid jackets and fur caps with fur muffs, and the frost of their breath was on their long mustaches. Each had an axe on his shoulder, and they carried cross-cut saws. A cross-cut saw has a long, narrow blade with wooden handles at the end. Two men must pull it back and forth across the edge of whatever they want to saw in two. But they could not saw ice that way because the ice was solid underfoot like a floor. It had no edge to cut across. When Father saw them, he laughed and called out, "You flipped that penny yet?" Everybody laughed but Almanzo. He did not know the joke. So French Joe told him. Once two Irishmen were sent out to saw ice with a cross-cut saw. They never sawed ice before. They looked at the ice and they looked at the saw till at last Pat took out a penny from his pocket and he says he, "Now Jamie, be fair. Heads or tails? Who goes down below?" Then Almanzo laughed. To think of anyone going down into the dark, cold water under the ice to pull one end of the cross-cut saw. It was funny that there were people who didn't know how to saw ice. He trudged with the others across the ice to the middle of the pond. A sharp wind blew there, driving wisps of snow before it. Above the deep water, the ice was smooth and dark, swept almost bare of snow. Almanzo watched while Joe and John chopped a big three-cornered hole in it. They lifted out the broken pieces of ice and carried them away, leaving a hole full of open water. She's about 20 inches thick," Lazy John said. "Well, then saw the ice 20 inches, said Father. Lazy John and French Joe knelt at the edge of the hole. They lowered their cross-cut saws into the water and began to saw. Nobody pulled the ends of the saws under the water. Side by side, they sawed two straight cracks through the ice, 20 inches apart and 20 feet long. Then with the axe, John broke the ice across, and a slab 20 inches wide, 20 inches thick, and 20 feet long rose a little and floated free. With a pole, John pushed the slab toward the three-cornered hole, and as the end was thrust out, crackling the thin ice freezing on the water, Joe sawed off 20-inch lengths of it. Father picked up the cubes with the big iron ice tongs and loaded them onto the bobsleds. Almanzo ran to the edge of the hole, watching the saw. Suddenly, right at the very edge, he slipped. He felt himself falling headlong into the dark water. His hands couldn't catch hold of anything. He knew he would sink and be drawn under the solid ice. The swift current would pull him under the ice where no one could find him. He'd drown, held down by the ice in the dark. French Joe grabbed him just in time. He heard a shout and felt a rough hand jerk him by one leg. He felt a terrific crash, and then he was lying on his stomach on the good solid ice. He got up to his feet. Father was coming, running. Father stood over him big and terrible. "You ought to have the worst whipping of your life," Father said. "Yes, Father," Almanzo whispered. He knew it. He knew he should have been more careful. A boy 9 years old is too big to do foolish things because he doesn't stop to think. Almanzo knew that, and he felt ashamed. He shrank up small inside his clothes, and his legs shivered, afraid of the whipping. Father's whippings hurt, but he knew he deserved to be whipped. The whip was on the bobsled. "I won't thrash you this time," Father decided, "but see to it you stay away from that edge." "Yes, Father," Almanzo whispered. He went away from the hole and did not go near it again. Father finished loading the bobsled. Then he spread the lap ropes on top of the ice, and Almanzo rode on them with Father and Royal back to the ice house near the barns. The ice house was built on boards with wide cracks in them. It was set high from the ground on wooden blocks and looked like a big cage, only the floor and the roof were solid. On the floor was a huge mound of sawdust, which Father had hauled from the lumber mill. With a shovel, and here's the picture of them cutting ice, by the way. If you don't have the book in front of you, that's the picture of them cutting ice out of the pond. With a shovel, Father spread the sawdust 3 inches thick on the floor. On this, he laid the cubes of ice 3 inches apart. Then he drove back to the pond, and Almanzo went to work with Royal in the ice house. They filled every crack between the cubes with sawdust and tamped it down tightly with sticks. Then they shoveled the whole mound of sawdust on top of the ice in a corner, and where it had been, they covered the floor with cubes of ice and packed them in sawdust. Then they covered it all with sawdust 3 inches thick. They worked as fast as they could, but before they finished, Father came with another load of ice. He laid down another layer of ice cubes 3 inches apart and drove away, leaving them to fill every crevice tightly with sawdust, and spread sawdust over the top and shovel the rest of the mound of sawdust up again. They worked so hard that the exercise kept them warm, but long before noon, Almanzo was hungrier than wolves. He couldn't stop work long enough to run into the house for a donut. All of his middle was hollow, with a gnawing inside of it. He knelt on the ice, pushing sawdust into the cracks with his mittened hands and pounding it down with a stick as fast as he could. And he asked Royal, "What would you like best to eat?" They talked about spare ribs, and turkey with dressing, and baked beans, and crackling cornbread, and other good things. But Almanzo said what he liked most in the world was fried apples and onions. When at last they went in to dinner, there on the table was a big dish of them. Mother knew what he liked best, and she had cooked it for him. Almanzo ate 4 large helpings of apples and onions fried together. He ate roast beef and brown gravy, and mashed potatoes and creamed carrots and boiled turnips and countless slices of buttered bread with crab apple jelly. Yummy. "It takes a great deal to feed a growing boy," Mother said, and she put a thick slice of bird's nest pudding on his bare plate and handed him the pitcher of sweetened cream speckled with nutmeg. Almanzo poured the heavy cream over the apples, nestled in the fluffy crust. The syrupy brown juice curled up around the edges of the cream. Almanzo took up his spoon and ate every bit. Then, until chore time, he and Royal worked in the ice house. All next day they worked, all the next day. Just at dusk on the 3rd day, Father helped them spread the last layer of sawdust over the topmost cubes of ice and in the peak of the ice house roof. And that job was done. Buried in sawdust, the blocks of ice would not melt in the hottest summer weather. One at a time, they would be dug out, and Mother would make ice cream and lemonade and cold eggnog. Chapter 7. Saturday night. That night, after they finished with the ice in the ice house. That night was Saturday night. All day long, Mother had been baking, and when Almanzo went into the kitchen for the milk pails, she was still frying donuts. The place was full of their hot brown smell and the wheaty smell of new bread and the spicy smell of cakes and the syrupy smell of pies. Almanzo took the biggest donut from the pan and bit off its crisp end. Mother was rolling out the golden dough, slashing it into long strips, rolling and doubling and twisting the strips. Her fingers flew. You could hardly see them. The strips seemed to twist themselves under her hands and to leap into the big copper kettle of swirling hot fat. Plump! They went into the bottom, sending up bubbles. Then quickly they came popping up to float slowly and swell till they rolled themselves over, their pale golden backs going into the fat and their plump brown bellies rising up out of it. They rolled over, Mother said, because they were twisted. Some women made a newfangled shape, round with a hole in the middle, but round donuts don't turn themselves over. Mother didn't have time to waste turning donuts. It was quicker to twist them. Almanzo liked baking day, but he didn't like Saturday night. On Saturday night, there was no cozy evening by the heater with apples and popcorn and cider. Saturday night was bath night. After supper, Almanzo and Royal again put their coats and caps and mufflers and mittens on. They carried a tub from the wash tub outdoors to the rainwater barrel. Everything was ghostly with snow. The stars were frosty in the sky, and only a little faint light came from the candle in the kitchen. The inside of the rainwater barrel was coated thick with ice, and in the center, where the ice was chopped every day to keep the barrel from bursting, the hole had grown smaller and smaller. Royal chopped at it, and when his hatchet went through with an oozy thud, the water welled up quickly because the ice was squeezing it from all sides. It's odd that water swells when it freezes. Everything else gets smaller in the cold. Almanzo began dipping water and floating pieces of ice into the wash tub. It was cold, slow work, dipping through the small hole, and he had an idea. Long icicles hung from the kitchen eaves. At the top, they were a solid piece of ice. Then their pointed tips hung down almost to the snow. Almanzo took hold of one and jerked, but only the tip broke off. The hatchet had frozen to the porch floor where Royal had laid it, but Almanzo tugged it loose. He lifted it up in both hands and hit the icicles. An avalanche of ice came down with a splintering crash. It was a glorious noise. "Hey, gimme," Royal said. But Almanzo hit the icicles again. The noise was louder than before. "You're bigger than I be. You hit him with your fists," Almanzo said. So Royal hit the icicles with both his fists. Almanzo hit them again with the hatchet. The noise was immense. Almanzo yelled and Royal yelled, and they hit more and more icicles. Big pieces of ice were flying all over the porch floor, and flying pieces pitted the snow. Along the eaves there was a gap as though the roof had lost some teeth. Mother flung open the kitchen door. "Mercy on us," she cried. "Royal, Almanzo, be you hurt?" "No, Mother," Almanzo said meekly. "What is it? What be you doing?" Almanzo felt a little guilty. But they had not really been playing when they had work to do. "Getting ice for the bathwater, Mother," he said. "Well, my land, such a racket I never heard. Must you yell like Comanches?" "No, Mother," Almanzo said. Mother's teeth chattered in the cold, and she shut the door. Almanzo and Royal silently picked up the fallen icicles and silently filled the tub. It was so heavy they staggered when they carried it, and Father had to lift it onto the kitchen stove. The ice melted while Almanzo greased his moccasins and Royal greased his boots. In the pantry, Mother was filling the 6-quart pan with boiled beans, putting in onions and peppers and the pieces of fat pork, and pouring scrolls of molasses over all. Then Almanzo saw her open the flour barrels. She flung rye flour and cornmeal into the big yellow crock and stirred in milk and eggs and things and poured the big baking pan full of the yellow-gray rye Injun dough. "You fetch the rye Injun, Almanzo. Don't spill it," she said. She snatched up the pan of beans, and Almanzo followed more slowly with a heavy pan of rye Injun. Father opened the big doors of the oven and the heater, and Mother slid the beans and the bread inside. They would bake there slowly till Sunday dinner time. Then Almanzo was left alone in the kitchen to take his bath. His clean underwear was hanging on the chair back to air and warm. The washcloth and the towel and the small wooden pannikin of soft soap were on another chair. He brought another wash tub from the woodshed and put it on the floor in front of the open oven door. He took off his waist and one pair of socks and his pants. Then he dipped some warm water from the tub on the stove into the tub on the floor. He took off his other pair of socks and his underwear, and his bare skin felt good in the heat from the oven. He toasted in the heat, and he thought he might just put on his clean underwear and not take the bath at all. But Mother would look when he went into the dining room. So he stepped into the water. It covered his feet. With his fingers, he dug some of the brown, slimy, soft soap from the pannikin and smeared it on the washcloth. Then he scrubbed himself well all over. The water was warm around his toes, but it felt cold on his body. His wet belly steamed in the heat from the oven, but his wet back shivered. And when he turned around, his back seemed to blister, but his front was very cold. So he washed as quickly as he could, and he dried himself and got into his warm underwaist and his woolly long drawers, and he put on his long woolen nightshirt. And then he remembered his ears. He took the washcloth again, and he scrubbed his ears and the back of his neck, and then he put on his nightcap. He felt very clean and good, and his skin felt sleek in the warm clothes. It was the Saturday night feeling. It was pleasant, but Almanzo didn't like it well enough to take a bath for it. If he could have his way, he wouldn't have taken a bath till spring. That sort of sounds like my grandson, who wouldn't take a bath till spring. Just the way kids are. He did not have to empty his tub, because if he went outdoors after taking a bath, he could catch cold. Alice would empty the tub and wash it before she bathed in it. Then Eliza Jane would empty Alice's, and Royal would empty Eliza Jane's, and Mother would empty Royal's. And late at night, Father would empty Mother's and take his bath, and the next morning he would empty the tub for the last time. Almanzo went into the dining room in his clean, creamy white underwear and socks and nightshirt and cap. Mother looked at him, and he went to her to be inspected. She laid down her knitting, and she looked at his ears and the back of his neck, and she looked at his soapy, clean face, and she gave him a hug and a squeeze. "There, run along with you to bed." He lighted a candle, and he padded quickly up the cold stairs and blew out the candle and jumped into the soft, cold feather bed. He began to say his prayers, but he went to sleep before he finished them. That's chapter 7 of Farmer Boy. I love these stories. There's something so honest and pure about them. They really resonate wonderfully, and I'm so grateful that all of you who are listening love them as much as all of us. I'm glad we all love them together, really, is the bottom line. If I'm able, I'll return tomorrow to keep reading. Although Allison has to decide if that's what she wants to do. This is Allison's event, and I'm grateful to have been asked to participate. But this is her thing, and she needs to decide what she wants to do. But this is so great, and I'm grateful we could spend this time together. I'm grateful I could spend this time with you and read something of Little House to you. So that's it for today. Allison will let you know what's coming tomorrow. Enjoy the rest of your day. Be safe. Be careful. Wash your hands regularly, just the way Almanzo did. Stay clean, but do it every day, multiple times a day. Don't wait till Saturday night. Take care. Have a good day.